crafters, this is Yana Smakula for simonsstm.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana episode. In this video, I have simple tips for you to set the scene or create that scenic backgrounds for your cards with no specialty tools. I'm a big fan of using colored cardstock for my cards. I love how colored cardstock instantly adds that pop of color, and I love how bright and vivid it is. Of course, you can always use specialty tools to create backgrounds, scenic backgrounds for your cards. You can use tools like background stamps, dies, or even stencils. But I wanted to go back to basics for a bit today and show you how you can use just plain paper and, with a little bit of tweaking, create fabulous scenic backgrounds for your cards. I'm making summer beach cards as an example in this video, but this technique can be adapted to other occasions. All you need to do is switch up the colors of cardstock. I'm using 3 different stamp sets from Simons Says Stamp for my cards to do all of my stamping. You see 2 of them on the screen right now. Now, I'm not going to show you the stamping part, the coloring, and the die cutting part of this process, as this video is not about that. But I did need, of course, to create the focal point images for my cards, and I used several stamps with a variety of beach images. The color scheme I picked for all of my cards was yellow and teal. I used the same colors of markers to color all of the images, and you can see the marker numbers. These are all Copic markers on the screen, and I also have them listed in the blog post and linked in the video description. Having created my images, I started building various little scenes, and as you can see, it is very easy to do. You simply group the images together, overlap them a bit, and you have yourself a pretty cool scene. Now, this scene is lacking a cool background. Here, I pulled a sheet of sea glass cardstock from Simons Says Stamp and situated my objects on top. It looks okay. The colored cardstock adds a nice colorful background, and you can leave it as is. It does look nice. But if you look closely, it feels if the objects are floating in the air. There's no ground. To add the ground to this background, I decided to ink blend a simple blob shape. Now, I looked through my stencils and I did not have a shape that worked for me. So I made one instead. I used a piece of scrap paper and I just drew a blob using a pencil. Anyone can do this. You don't need any skills for this. You just draw a simple blob shape. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it has to be imperfect. It doesn't have to be symmetrical. It just has to fit on an A2 card. That's an only requirement. Next, use scissors or craft knife and cut the inner part out. Now, it's better to use a craft knife as you can just start in the center and simply freehand it. Again, your cutting doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to follow the pencil line exactly. You can go outside the line or go past the line. You're just making a simple, imperfect blob. And there we have it. Next, treat this piece of paper as a stencil. Position it on your background. You can take it to the light to see if the placement works for you, and just tape it in place with low-tech tape. Grab your ink blending tool and ink and blend the ground or the shadow on your paper. And as you can see, ink blending on colored cardstock works fine. I'm using the color Latte from Simons Says Stamp and a large Simon ink blending brush to add the ground to my piece. And I'm going pretty heavy with the ink here. You can go light if you want. Once I remove my improvised stencil, you can see the fun blob shape blended onto the blue background. It now looks a bit better as I have the ground for my objects. I just need to foam mount everything on top and add my sentiment, and my card is going to be done. I opted to stamp 2 sentiments, one above and one below my scene to help balance things out. I also used a white pen, and I used a lot of it when making these cards. I added white dots onto the background to help mimic the look of sand. You can also spot some white dots on the drink. The dots look a little bit like air bubbles in there. And I also added some white highlights. And that's what the finished card looks like. I did the same trick and ink blended the same blob shape onto a yellow cardstock panel. The yellow paper sort of looks like sand, and the blob shape looks like a shadow or wet sand next to the beach chair. Again, it helps to ground my scene and add interest with minimal effort. So for these 2 examples, we used just a single sheet of cardstock and did minimal ink blending. We can also combine several colors of cardstock to create backgrounds. Here, I used colored cardstock to create a color-blocked landscape. So I have yellow sand in the foreground, a narrow area that signifies the ocean with a skinny white stripe in front of it that looks like sea foam, and finally, a large light blue panel at the top that looks like the sky. No specialty dyes were used to make this background. All I did was cut my paper at an angle using a paper trimmer. I then glued everything onto the background, the yellow panel, and built my scene on top. I didn't do any ink blending here as I didn't need it. I already had my ground to hold my scene, but I did use a C1 Copic marker, which is a cool gray, a very light gray, and I added some shadow under the beach chair. Now, I prefer to use the marker here versus ink blending, as I can use the marker after I've adhered everything, and I can add my shadow under the objects, specifically in specific areas. And again, my shadow is not perfect. It's very irregular, but it works for this type of card. I just added the sentiment and seagull stamping in the sky portion of this background, and then some white dots onto the sand section, and that finished this card. So we used a paper trimmer to make a straight or diagonal cut for this card. For my next example, I'm freehand cutting the paper to create an organic looking shoreline. I'm using scissors and just freehanding the diagonal cut. I want it to be wavy. I don't want it to be straight. So just go ahead and freehand it. Next, I used a sheet of white paper and I try to mimic the same shape so that I have a little bit of the sea foam on my card. So this card is going to have a diagonal design with the sea and the sentiment stamping up at the top and the sand with the colored and cutout objects down at the bottom. So you can use your colored cardstock to create fabulous and unique backgrounds for your cards without any other specialty tools. I hope you found this video useful, and I hope you're going to dive into your colored cardstock stash and create. If you make a card inspired by this video, as always, guys, we'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always enjoy seeing what you make. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you, and I'll see you next time.